January 5th, 1943. Off Guadalcanal. The sun lifts like an indifferent judge over a restless sea, and the cruiser USS Helena moves through it as if every wake might be the last. Men on deck move with the practiced calm of those who have seen chaos, and keep watch as if routine could hold back fate. Radar operators bend over glowing scopes. Lookouts scan the horizon, and gunnery crews polish steel that will be asked to do what? Until now, only miracle or luck could achieve. The night before, Helena had pounded Japanese positions at Munda Airfield on New Georgia, and now Task Force 67.2 withdraws southward with nerves taut because retaliation in the Pacific tends to be swift and brutal. 4 Japanese dive bombers appear on the rim of the world, silhouettes chopping the light. Older I-type Val dive bombers, slower than the newer D4Ys, but deadly in a veteran pilot's hands. And the alarm bell rings. Battle stations called, every gun crew scrambled into place. The enemy dives, bombs find the HMNZS Achilles, then the attackers begin to climb away, thinking themselves beyond the reach of American fire. And then Helena's 5-inch to 38 caliber guns answer, not with the 1,000-round tremors naval doctrine would have once demanded, but with a few calm, measured salvos that streak toward the distant planes now more than 4 miles away. What happens next will read like an invention from another age. Shells burst near the aircraft without the impossible arithmetic of a direct hit, and 2 bombers erupt, flame blooming against the blue, tumbling to the sea. Gunners stare, failing at first to reconcile what they've seen with everything they were taught about ballistics, because these were not lucky hits, but precision kills produced by a fuse that did not wait to be told when to go off. It listened, sensed, decided, detonating when proximity made its fragments lethal. The secret behind those detonations was a weapon of such transformational potential that the project that produced it was guarded only behind the atomic program itself. The proximity fuse, code-named variable time or VT, a small device that turned the dreadful arithmetic of anti-aircraft fire into a near-automatic predator, and would, within months and years, change the face of naval and field artillery warfare. To grasp why the VT mattered so catastrophically, we must remember what shooting down aircraft had looked like before it existed. An exercise in frustration where contact, fuses demanded impossible luck, and time fuses demanded the near-mathematical precision of predicting where a plane and a shell would be at the same instant, a calculus complicated by altitude changes, wind, speed, and 1,000 tiny errors. Early in the war, the cost in metal and lives was obscene. Tens of thousands of rounds sometimes for a single aircraft. Ships returning to port with magazines exhausted while the sky still burned above them. Pearl Harbor. Coral Sea. Midway and later, Pacific convoys bled sailors because anti-aircraft fire was blind against speed and 3 dimensions. The United States did not invent the idea of a shell that detonated when it was near a target. Scientists and engineers in Britain, Germany, Japan, and elsewhere had toyed and failed with acoustic, magnetic, and primitive radio solutions for years. But no one could build a miniature electronic brain that would survive the violence of being fired from a gun, spin madly at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, and then keep working through rain, tropic heat, or Arctic cold. Vacuum tubes shattered into glass dust under 20,000 G. Batteries were too large, antennas too clumsy, and the safety problem loomed. A fuse that armed too soon might kill its own crew, and an army of production lines would be needed to make enough for war. Britain's Tizard mission in 1940 carried concept papers and the desperate plea that America, with its industrial muscle, try to turn theory into reality. And the United States answered by assigning the VT program to Section T at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under Dr. Merle Tuve, a small, fiercely secretive community of physicists. engineers and industrial partners who worked with a level of security that mirrored Manhattan. Names were stripped from components. Production was compartmentalized, and workers often had no idea what the pieces they assembled would become. The technical hurdles were almost farcical in their cruelty. Radio tubes that functioned in a radio room broke into glass confetti in the gun's barrel. Batteries could not survive the acceleration. The tiny radar transmitter and receiver had to share a pencil-thin antenna and distinguish the faint echo of a plane from the deafening self-noise of the transmitter. Sylvania and other firms grafted ruggedness into tiny tubes by reinforcing glass, shortening lead wires to reduce flex, using tough tungsten filaments and exotic gas fills. Work that read like improvisation at the extremes of manufacturing. James Van Allen, then a young physicist on the team, suggested clever mechanical damping, sarin wax and transformer oil mixtures, and a deliberate mounting angle. And the breakthrough came. Tubes could survive a majority of firings. The battery problem solved itself by elegant inversion. A fragile glass ampule of electrolyte that shattered under firing, using the destructive forces of launch to activate the power source as centrifugal force, drove the liquid outward to the electrodes. The fuse's radar circuitry used an autodyne detector to compare transmitted and reflected signals and a series of wave suppression and timing circuits to avoid false triggers from sea, rain, or friendly aircraft. Safety was made redundantly foolproof. Arm mechanisms that required time of flight, spin-up switches that prevented premature activation, and batteries that did not exist until the moment the shell was catapulted free of the gun. The first meaningful live test in August. 1942, aboard USS Cleveland in the Chesapeake Bay used radio-controlled drone targets and produced results that seemed like prophecy. 3 drones downed with 4 bursts on the first day. Tests so convincing that mass production proceeded at once. Production itself became an industrial marvel. From Crossley and Cincinnati, converting refrigerator factories into fuse lines, to RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and Sylvania operating dozens of plants. Tens of thousands of workers produced millions of fuses under impossible secrecy. A wartime ballet of assembly lines and quality control that at its peak turned out tens of thousands of units every day. But technology and industry were not the whole story. The weapon's strategic and ethical implications were devastatingly complex, and the Navy initially restricted the VT's use to deep water, where duds would sink beyond enemy reach. Fearful that a single intact fuse in German hands could help develop equally devastating countermeasures against Allied bombers, for months the Army watched as the Navy's fleets opened new chapters of survival at sea, and the data were brutal and persuasive. In 1943, VT rounds, though only a quarter of anti-aircraft ammunition expended, accounted for more than half of the aircraft destroyed, reducing rounds per kill from thousands to a few hundred and expanding the lethal fragment area from a narrow cone into a cloud thousands of square feet wide. Night engagements, once a refuge for attackers, became as deadly as daylight because the shell itself could find its target without visual or perfect radar cues. The Pacific, faced with kamikaze tactics and massed suicide attacks, saw the VT's most immediate life-saving applications. Predictable, suicidal trajectories played directly into the fuse's strengths and turned waves of attackers into mathematical losses for Japan. Yet in Europe, the calculus of risk versus reward forced agonizing decisions. Allied planners feared that a captured fuse could be reverse-engineered, multiplied and used to make German flak 3 or 4 times more lethal, jeopardizing the strategic bombing campaign and the long war of attrition over Germany. Those fears held until December 1944, when the Battle of the Bulge forced a reckoning. Under Eisenhower's urgent demand, the restrictions were lifted on December 20, and within hours, hundreds of thousands of VT rounds were unleashed on the continent. The effect was immediate and apocalyptic for attackers. Artillery that had been a blunt, often ineffective instrument now exploded at treetop height, cutting down infantry in the open, annihilating patrols in forests and destroying German momentum. Patton's artillery, using the funny fuses, annihilated an enemy battalion attempting a river crossing and wrote home astonished that the new shells would force a rethinking of warfare. Antwerp and London, under barrage by V-1 flying bombs, found salvation when proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire turned interception rates from the dismal to the decisive and kept critical supply ports and populous capitals functioning. Okinawa's slaughter would still be terrible, 26 ships sunk and thousands of lives lost. But historians and operations researchers would later quantify that, without VT fuses, the death toll and strategic cost would have been far worse. And in the crucible of 1945, the proximity fuse accounted for a staggering proportion of the ammunition that protected fleets and men at the point of greatest danger. Beyond the statistics, the VT changed what commanders could imagine. The sky was no longer an unmanageable, indifferent space where planes could pass through vast volumes of air with impunity, and infantry could no longer rely on the old sanctuaries of trenches or tree lines. It validated a new model of mobilized science. Civilian researchers and industry, given resources and clarity of purpose, could solve near-impossible problems within the span of years, and the fuse's production network. 110 factories, 87 companies, and over 100,000 workers remains one of the great manufacturing miracles of the war. The story of the proximity fuse is therefore two stories in one. A tale of brilliant, fearless engineering that wrested functionality from the violent physics of artillery, and a story of moral and strategic judgment about how and when to introduce a weapon whose capture might alter the balance of power. On a sunlit morning off Guadalcanal, as Helena's gunners watched projectiles bloom in mid-air and aircraft fall from the sky, sailors and scientists alike felt the weight of that decision. The fuse would save lives and change campaigns, yet its very secrecy and the choices it forced upon commanders would haunt strategy long after the war's guns fell silent.